Okay, I want to talk about an economy bowl or a bowl from a board. You probably heard about that, and there are other YouTube videos about an economy bowl. But I've taken it a step further, and I'm not sure I've seen this on YouTube before. So this is a standard economy bowl, and it's made from a board, just simply board. I cut that. But this is a board. This is all the material you need to make a bowl like this. And this is maple. This one's hickory. And then you can embellish it a little bit. This is a cherry bowl that I've got to obviously strip through it. And then you reach a point where it's I call this an economy bowl on steroids. It's just a lot of woods mixed in, and it gets real fun. And after you've put these together. And I'll show you how we build this and put it together. And then the fun part is turning it, because you're not sure what you're going to get when you turn it. You can try to envision it, but you're never really sure. And sometimes you're disappointed, sometimes you're really surprised and elated at how well it turned out. So that's what we're going to talk about. And you start with like I said, you start with a board like this. And you can start with a board like this. And when you look at other YouTubes, you'll probably see an economy bowl term like this. So you have a board either this wide as a starting point, or you glue a couple together, and you glue a block on the back to mount it to your lathe, and then it's turned. It's cut into a circle on the bandsaw, and then it's turned, and with a parting tool. You come in at an angle of 45 degrees, and you cut this into, maybe this size, you cut it into 3 or 4 circles, which you end up stacking together to turn your bowl. But I'm not a big fan of doing it on the lathe. I'd rather do it on the bandsaw, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So here's the board I started with. I cut it into 2 parts. Now I need to cut this on the bandsaw with these circles. I draw the circles, cut it on the bandsaw at a 45-degree angle. So, well, the first cut, the outer ring is not cut at 45. It's just a regular bandsaw cut. And then I turn the table, and we'll be showing you some of that. Turn the table to 45 degrees, and then I cut these cut these circles, and I end up making, well, let me show you just where we're headed, and then we'll show you the process of that. Okay, so I pulled some other materials together to give you a better explanation, but this is what we were talking about before, cutting this at the 45, and after you've made these cuts, this is what you end up with. Now this is the same, actually this is the same board, but when I was trying to make the second bowl out of the same board, the board it had some bark coming in, so I couldn't get this full width. So I just glued another board to it. Now I could have glued a piece of maple to the piece of maple, but that never works because the grain is different. So you might as well make it look different, really different. So I put a piece of cherry in there and glued it up, and so I had 2 boards, one maple and one maple and cherry. And then I made some cuts. So I made the cuts that we just talked about, and start with your center cut, and you cut that out of and then you keep working around, and you end up like this. And so you can see how it all works. And then you stack them, and you stack them like this. And that's how you get your bowl. You glue a block on the bottom to mount it to your lathe. So it ends up more like this. This one's not totally glued together, but it's partially glued together. And I think I have a block. Yeah, I have a block on the bottom and I draw those circles on the bottom to make sure I find center, and to make sure I put the block in the center, so that each corner of this block is touching one of the rings, or it's a 1/16 away from the ring or whatever, but that gets it in the center. And then when I glue these together, you have to be pretty careful to get them centered. Otherwise, I mean, obviously you could end up pretty far off if you're not careful. And I also pretty much glue these rings together. Sometimes I offset them just a little bit. If they're all lined up, it can be a weak spot, but I haven't had any problem with that. But sometimes I'll offset them just a little bit. You don't want to offset them too much because you get all your grain running this way, and if you had one with grain running this way, one with grain running this way, it definitely would crack. You'd have some problems with that because, as you know, the board keeps moving as the weather changes. So that's what we're heading towards. I also drew a line down through here, if you can see that line, and that's to make sure that it's oriented the way I want because of the grain. In other words, I wouldn't want this to be this way, and if I wasn't paying attention, this would work just as well, but the grain doesn't follow the grain of the original board. So I'm pretty careful about that when I'm putting that together. And I'll show you how we cut these on the bandsaw. We'll do that in just a minute, but while I'm thinking about it, I'll talk about gluing these together. After you've cut them out, you need to clean them up because this joint needs to be, and I've jointed this before I started. This joint has been put through the joiner. But after you cut it, you might have some fuzzies on the edge, so I clean those up and make sure that's going to be a good glue joint. And I do that, you know, with each of them. These have not been cleaned up. You can see the little fuzzies there. And those fuzzies, I don't know how well you can see that. Those fuzzies are going to end up messing up the glue joint when I glue them together like this, when I stack them. So those have all got to get cleaned up, obviously. When you go to glue them together, let me try this, the bigger one, to explain the whole process here. When you glue these together, I always like to have a little pressure on them when they're drying. Now some people just do the rub joint, and that works pretty well, and then you hold it for like 30 seconds when you get it where you want it. But I like to have a little pressure. And if you put a clamp here, a quick gripper or a bar clamp or something, it's going to want to do that. And every time it's just going to want to do that. So I've got these little devices that I built, and these are cut at a 45 degree, and then a little piece of plywood is glued and screwed on the top, and so you put that here, and when you pull that together, it rides right up, and now you can clamp it as hard as you want, and it's not going to pop up on you because the pressure is spread throughout the whole width of that board. However, if you pull this too tight, you're going to make this out of round. You're going to pull these sides in, and this joint when you start is a good joint, and then as you pull this in, that joint's going to do this. So you got to just bring it up snug and leave it and let it dry for the usual. I use Titebond 3 at the moment, and half an hour is good, as long as you don't put pressure on it. Half an hour you can take it out of the clamp and set it aside, as you know. So let's move over to the bandsaw, and we'll make a bandsaw cut and see how that goes, and then we'll come back here and talk a little bit more about the width of these boards and some of the other aspects to talk about.